All right, well, welcome. I hope you all had a good lunch. And I'm curious, how many of you, is it your first time here at PGConf India? First time? Wow, come on in. Oh, you're the audio person. Okay, and it's my second time. How many of you, is it your second time? All right, and anybody been here more than 3? Or, wonderful. I feel very lucky to be here. There's actually a bunch of speakers whose flights got canceled and who couldn't make it, which is kind of, it's been a challenge. But I made it, and I'm here, and I feel very lucky, and I'm glad to be back. We're here to talk, as RT said, about 10 Postgres Hacker Journeys. I'm turning this on because it doesn't feel loud enough. And in the Postgres world, a hacker is somebody who contributes to the database itself, to the open source project. And so it means different things in the cybersecurity world, of course, but we're going to talk about these 10 different Postgres Hacker Journeys. Come on in, feel free. Just find a seat anywhere. I know that it's right after lunch. A little bit of background about me. I started at Sun Microsystems back when Sun Microsystems still existed, and I worked on developer tools and in the kernel for much of the early part of my career. And I first started working in open source back in 2004 when we first started the project to open source the Solaris operating system. And then in 2017, I met a gentleman who's sitting back in the audience named Sumed Patak, and the other 2 co-founders of Citus Data, and I joined Citus, which was a small Postgres startup in San Francisco. And I've been working in and around Postgres ever since. Microsoft acquired Citus back in 2019, and yeah, I'm still here working on Postgres community work. And there's a whole bunch of Postgres work happening at Microsoft, and I write this annual blog post that gives an overview of everything from Azure and the managed service to all of our open source work. But I put this simplified version of this large infographic on the screen just to show you that my focus is on the community side of things. So I head up initiatives like sponsoring conferences like here at PGConf India, but other ones around the world as well. I host a podcast. I run this virtual event called Posette, an event for Postgres, which we'll talk about later. But before we dive into the podcast, because there's a connection between the podcast and this talk, I just wanted to share this photo that I took near the Acropolis in Athens about 1.5 years ago. And when I first studied computer science, I thought that studying history was a complete and total waste of time. And I went to a university in the United States that didn't have a core curriculum. I mean, in India, when you go to university, is there a core curriculum, like requirements you must meet across all the disciplines? Is that how it works? And then there's the special courses that you take for your major, for your degree? Okay, so where I went to school, we prided ourselves on having a new curriculum, and you didn't have to cover all the areas. And so I didn't take a single history class in my studies because I thought it was dumb and a waste of time, and I wanted to focus on engineering and mathematics and computer science. Since then, I've grown up a little bit, and I've realized that understanding how other people have gotten to where they are and what they learned along the way is a great way to level up, right? I like to stand on the shoulders of other giants who have come before. And I said I would mention the podcast. So this is a picture that I took actually at my mother-in-law's house because there was construction happening where I normally do my podcast recordings. And so I had to drive over to my in-laws' house and set up on a desk there. But once a month, I do record this podcast called Talking Postgres. Now, I'm curious, this is a little dangerous of a question, but how many of you have heard of or listened to a Talking Postgres episode? Okay, that's kind of cool. I would love to see all your hands come up next time I give this talk, but for now I'll go with that. It's actually bordering on being among the top 10% of podcasts worldwide, which is pretty funny for a niche, or not pretty funny, pretty surprising for a niche Postgres podcast. But I record it once a month, and I talk to people who either are users of Postgres or are hackers, are contributors and committers to the open source project. And I'm very blessed. I've had the same co-producer since the very beginning. His name is Aaron Wislang. He lives in Canada. And so he's been with me from the beginning. And for the first year, I had a co-host, Pino DeCandia, but now I'm the only host, and I generally bring in one guest each month to delve into their learnings. So you can see the faces on the screen of all these amazing 44 guests that I've had so far on the show. And in the show, we get to talk to them about why they do what they do, what their origin stories are, how they got there. And it's really, really fun. So if you want to check it out, there is a QR code, but you can find it online at talkingpostgres.com. So these 10 hackers have all been guests on the podcast. I've actually had other committers and other hackers that are guests as well. And there were a few more I wanted to swizzle in. I wanted to have an off by 1 or 2 error and actually feature learnings from 11 or 12 former guests. But for today, this talk includes learnings from Melanie Plagueman, Tom Lane, Robert Haas, Thomas Monroe, David Rowley, Daniel Gustafson, Bruce Momjun, Heike Linikangas, I hope I said that right, Heike, and Alvaro Herrera and Andres Freund. So hopefully you're familiar with at least one of those names. But if not, that's okay. Their learnings are valuable even if you don't know who they are. And hopefully in the future, the next time I give this talk, I'll incorporate a few more. And as I said before, I wanted to stand on the shoulders of giants. So that's why I created this talk. And I'm hoping that some of you will get to benefit from their learnings and their lessons too. So you do not have to be a Postgres contributor. You do not have to be a database hacker who's working on the upstream open source project to benefit from this talk. So if you're an app developer, a DBA, a data engineer, maybe you're someone who's just thinking about becoming a Postgres contributor someday, or you're a user. And all of those different classes of people can benefit from these lessons, I think. So here we go. There's 2 caveats as I give the talk, and I hope it's showing up right. Yeah, it is. Okay. The first caveat is I do include quotes, like I'm not going to read the quotes to you, but there are detailed quotes in the talk that will show on the screen. And I did shorten those quotes in some places. So if you see my slides published online later and you go and do a search for that exact quote, it won't match the transcript. I just shortened it and tightened it for readability, but I did not alter the meaning of any of those quotes. The second caveat is just that there are lots of other Postgres contributors in the world who have not yet been guests on the podcast. And everybody's story is a bit unique. So I looked for patterns and I tried to find commonalities, but your mileage can vary. Like the advice in this talk is not the only way to become a developer or to become a hacker. So please know that. I do not mean to kind of limit anybody's potential with the stories and the learnings I'm going to share. Okay? Sound good? All right. So as I looked for patterns across these very long transcripts, the episodes are like the minimum length of a podcast episode on Talking Postgres is probably an hour, but many of the episodes are an hour and a half. Now, my friends tell me that they listen to it at 1.5 speed, sometimes 2x speed. So it doesn't take them an hour and a half to listen to the whole thing. The other thing my friends tell me is they don't always listen to the episodes all in one sitting. They might listen to it on their commute. Their commute's only 20 minutes, so it takes them like 3 or 4 days to finish. But anyway, as I went through all these transcripts and revisited these conversations, I was looking for patterns. And there were 4 forces that jumped out at me. And so that's how I structured the talk. And the first force is catalysts. So I do always ask people about their origin stories and how they got involved, why they got involved. So we'll look at some of those triggers first. And then we'll look at knowledge inputs, and that'll be a quick section. There were just some great recommendations of resources that people learned from that I felt like I just had to share. And then we'll look at learning through code, because, I mean, actually, I'm curious, how many of you learn best by, say, reading or watching, like watching a demo or reading a book? Okay, so a handful of you. How many of you learn best by doing something? Hands on the keyboard. More of you. Okay, so that's what this third section will be about, the learning through code section. And then the final section is really the meat of the talk, and it's what I call the invisible curriculum. These are things that I feel like none of us get taught in school. And depending on who your manager is and how good they are, sometimes you don't even learn it at work, except maybe over a long period of time. So that's, I think, the fun part of the talk is the invisible curriculum. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start with those catalysts. And just like fingerprints, every single person I talk to, their origin story, the thing that triggered them to get involved in becoming a Postgres hacker is unique. They all started in very different ways. So I can't cover them all because that would be 10 different origin stories and I wouldn't have time for the rest of the talk. But there were a couple that I just wanted to share with you. The first is what many of us call a scratch and itch story. I don't know if that phrase in English is something that you use here in India. But Thomas Monroe is a Postgres hacker. He lives in New Zealand. He first started off earlier in his career, he was a user of databases. And originally, before he got to know Postgres, he was a user of MySQL. And the application that he was working on all of a sudden got mentioned in some US radio or TV show, and it got a ton of hits. And it just crashed and it had a complete meltdown. And that caused him to start investigating other databases, and that caused him to discover Postgres and how Postgres did locking, and that's how he got involved. So I just thought that was an interesting happenstance. Then there's another Postgres hacker named Heikki Linikangas. He's a committer. He's the co-founder of Neon, which was acquired last year by Databricks. And what you may not know, because he's been involved in Postgres forever, it seems, right, is that when he had his second child and he was home on paternity leave, I think he was living in Finland at the time. So he's on paternity leave, and this little girl, she slept. You know that phrase, slept like a baby? Babies don't really sleep that well. But this baby did. And so he had all this time on his hands. And he was like, well, what am I going to do? I want to get involved in a new project. Probably should be open source. And that's how he fell into Postgres. He started checking out the source base, and he got involved in the community. And, you know, that's what he's been doing ever since. So I thought that was kind of a cool story. So if any of you are about to have a baby, and if that baby ends up being one who sleeps and you're not yet involved in the open source project, maybe this too can be your origin story. And then does anybody know where this photo is taken? Not Venice. Other guesses, but good guess, and thank you, because of the water, right? So totally get the connection. Yes, it's Copenhagen, exactly. So Daniel Gustafsson is another Postgres hacker. He actually works at Microsoft with me, and back in 2005, so we're talking over 20 years ago, he went to go to Linux Forum because he wanted to hear a FreeBSD expert named Robert Watson give a talk. And while he was there, he had some time to kill, and he just happened to be walking by a room where Bruce Momgen, another longtime Postgres core team member and contributor. And Bruce has actually been here at PGConf India for several different years. I know he was here last year. Anyway, Bruce was teaching this multi-hour long training class on Postgres, and Daniel just happened to walk in the room. And he sat down. He didn't know much about Postgres at that point, and he got completely hooked. And then he had to take the train home from Copenhagen to where he lived in Sweden afterwards, and he was downloading Postgres onto his laptop on the train, and the rest is history. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And he says to you, if he tells the story, he says, I can't explain why I went there. There meaning the Bruce Momgen class. He says, but I'm very glad I did. So this is my opportunity, too, to also give a shout out to Bruce. And anybody who is a speaker at Postgres conferences, who does trainings, like those half-day trainings that happened here at PGConf India yesterday, to anyone who's a speaker, like the fact that you might change the course of someone's career by a talk that you're giving, that's pretty darn cool. So I want to applaud and thank people for doing that. All right. So how many of you have heard of a Postgres hacker named Tom Lane? Show of hands. Okay, so a little backstory on Tom. He's been involved in the Postgres project. Well, Bruce has been involved since the very beginning, but Tom shortly afterwards. So we're talking almost 30 years, because this year, Postgres, the open source project, is having its 30th anniversary in the middle of the year. I can't remember if it's May or June. And anyway, Tom was going to university in the United States. He was a young college student just starting off. And his dream, his vision, was that he wanted to become a pinball machine designer. And if you listen to the episode with Tom Lane as a guest, you can hear the whole story. But Tom is world famous. He's probably one of our most prolific contributors to the Postgres open source project. They're all brilliant, every single contributor, but he is especially so. And so anyway, he had his idea that he was going to become a mechanical engineer, become a pinball machine designer. But I think it was the EE professors who really were fascinating. And somehow he ended up taking a software class. And a professor came up to him partway through that class and said, you know, you really should go apply to be a research assistant in computer science because you're really good at this. And at the time, he was trying to figure out like what kind of part-time job he was going to have. And he decided that, well, being a research assistant would probably be a lot more fun than flipping hamburgers. So instead of going to a restaurant to flip hamburgers, he got involved in software, and the course of Postgres is changed as a result. The last origin story that I want to share with you is from a committer named Melanie Plagueman. And her story is kind of wild. I think she was working as a consultant, and she got exposed to databases and IT, and she decided that she wanted to work on Postgres. But she didn't have the training at that point, or she didn't feel like she did. So she saved her money, she quit her job, and then she went all in on learning everything that she could about Postgres. I don't know how long she gave herself, whether it was a year or a year and a half or 2 years, but she gave herself a long period of time, a long runway, to just learn everything she could. And she was successful in that, and she ended up landing a job at Greenplum, where they did a lot of pair programming, and she was the beneficiary of a lot of mentoring. And so, like, her quote was just that she felt like she would be unemployed if it weren't for all the mentorship she'd received. So there was a little shout out there of gratitude. Okay. But all these catalysts, and I'm done with the catalyst section now, I almost labeled this section serendipity, which has an element of luck to it, but it wasn't just about luck, because every single one of these people, when presented with the opportunity, they said yes. They walked through that door, even if they were scared or nervous. Like quitting your job, like with a vision of what you wanted to do, but not having any guarantees, that takes a certain amount of courage. Tom Lane could have easily said, no, I've already got the job lined up. I'm going to be flipping burgers for the summer. And he didn't. He said yes. He became that research assistant. So I just think that's a nice reminder, because it's very easy to say no to opportunities if it's not what you originally had in mind. Okay, so now let's do knowledge inputs. There were some books that people recommended that I'll just do a quick shout out to. Melanie loved the book From Nan to Tetris, and found that was super helpful to her as she ramped up. David Rowley, his favorite was The Art of SQL. Daniel Gustafson had 3 favorite books that he still has as Bibles that he references. The first is Practice of Programming by Kernighan and Pike, the Purple Book on the bottom row, and the Dragon Book also on the bottom row. So by the way, I do publish my slides. I don't mind when you take photos of slides though, because that's kind of like a compliment and it gives me positive feedback while I'm giving the talk. But I will publish them afterwards, and I'll post on LinkedIn with a link to them on my speaker deck. Okay? Another thing that I thought was interesting is if any of you know David Rowley, he's another Postgres committer who lives in New Zealand. I sometimes joke that there are more Postgres committers per capita in New Zealand than any other country in the world, and I guess that's a bit of a geek joke, but I find it amusing. Anyway, he does a lot of backcountry hiking and adventuring, and earlier in his career, he went on this remote desert adventure in Australia. He was from Scotland, but for some reason, Australia caught his fancy. And there wasn't anything to do in the evenings. He was traveling by himself, but he had downloaded the entire Postgres 9.1 manual. And so he read the manual in the evenings, cover to cover, because he didn't have anything else to do. And he also spent a lot of time reading the mailing lists and learning from people who were already hackers on the project. And he found that super valuable as well. And then Melanie Plageman, she said that she watched every single Andy Pavlo lecture ever. How many of you have heard of Andy Pavlo? Okay. Carnegie Mellon professor, specializes in databases, not just Postgres. He cares about all databases. But Melanie, with the help of her best friend, who was a developer, she kind of created her own curriculum to land that dream Postgres job. And the curriculum was designed to work for her learning style, because she realized that her learning style was not necessarily the one, that existed when she had been in university. So she did end up watching every Andy Pavlo lecture, and there are a ton of them out there on the internet. So if that's your cup of tea and how you like to learn, you might want to do the same. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about learning through code. Actually, yeah, I'll switch gears. So David Rowley again, he had discovered IRC back in the day, so we ended up writing this channel service bot for IRC. And originally he was going to write it in C++, but he had some trouble with that, so we ended up switching to C. And that's when he learned all about data structures and hash tables and B trees, and it kind of got him hooked and comfortable programming in C as well. And he also said that because he was looking at processing a lot of data as part of this work, the lookups needed to be really, really fast. And what I found was so fascinating about that is if you talk to David Moore, or in the podcast episode, he was explaining how when he was a teenager, he and his friends used to tune their motorbikes to try to make them go faster. And he said that later, when he got involved in Postgres, he found that tuning Postgres performance gave him the same kind of buzz inside that he used to get tuning those motorbikes. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and just made me realize that some things never change. Performance people probably care about performance in lots of different aspects of their lives. I mentioned Bruce Momjian earlier. So as I talked to him on the podcast, I had no idea that earlier in his career, he used to work in a law firm. And he was a consultant to the law firm, and the law firm was obviously storing a lot of data in databases, and that got Bruce curious about database internals, and it was the early 1990s, and he's like, I tried to write a database, and I failed. I tried to write another database, and he failed again. But then 1996 came around, and he decided to get involved in the Postgres open source project, and the rest is history. But I thought that was an interesting example of realizing that you could, just trying to do it. He tried to write one from scratch. So it fell into the learning through code section. Tom Lane, he started off as a user of Postgres, not as a hacker, not as a contributor. And the platform that he and his co-founder needed to support ran on HPUX, and there were some bugs in Postgres with regards to HPUX support, so we started submitting bug fixes. First for HPUX, and then they had a dependency on the listen and notify capability, so we submitted some more bug fixes there, and he described it as getting sucked down a rabbit hole of discovering that there were all sorts of really interesting CS problems in the Postgres database space. So that's kind of what got him involved. And then Melanie, she ended up, as part of her self-made curriculum for learning about Postgres, writing a Postgres extension. And I'm curious, how many of you use Postgres extensions in addition to Postgres? Okay, so a lot of hands are going up. How many of you have ever written or worked on or supported a Postgres extension? Okay. So still a lot of hands. That's cool. So she ended up creating one that basically was a souped up version of the format function, and she found it fascinating and fun. She describes it as a really cool project, but it forced her to learn Postgres internals, because you couldn't craft that extension without understanding the underpinnings of Postgres. And I talked to some people who were involved in interviewing her at Green Plum later, which was that first dream job that she landed, and they told me that this Postgres extension that she wrote was absolutely influential on her landing that job. So I thought that was kind of cool. Then there's someone named Robert Haas, longtime Postgres contributor. I had him on the podcast to talk about a mentoring program that he started last year. And last year, the year before? Oh my gosh, year before, 2024. And so we spent most of the episode talking about the new Postgres Hackers Discord and this mentoring program and what was involved. But we did have a little detour where we talked about his origin story. And from when he first got involved on the mailing list, he started to do a lot of patch review, because he realized that in reviewing other people's patches, he would be learning more and more about Postgres and about the system. And then he found himself asking this question: what is Tom Lane going to say about this patch? And could I say what Tom Lane is going to say before Tom Lane says it? So by the time Tom notices, this patch is in a better state. It's performing better. So I thought that was kind of interesting. What would Tom Lane do? What would Tom Lane say? So, but it is true that patch review is one of the best ways to learn more about the Postgres database if being a contributor is something that you want to do. And I don't mean using an LLM to go review the patch, but I mean learning from the experience yourself. All right, so now we're going to switch gears and look at the invisible curriculum. And that's that stuff I mentioned that nobody teaches you, or at least I don't think so. Nobody taught me. But it has to do with emotional intelligence, shifting your mindset, communicating across cultures. And I don't know if you've ever seen the map of all the Postgres committers in the world. And I do think that's a good proxy for all of the Postgres contributors in the world. But they're everywhere. Every continent, so many different countries, and so many different native languages. And so communicating across cultures ends up being really, really important. When I tried to think of a metaphor, I ended up coming up with a coat of armor for this section. And it made sense to me, because if you're going to tame your ego, or take feedback, or manage your emotions, deal with your frustrations, or work in public, and we'll talk about working in public more in a minute, then it's like you're taking off your armor, because you have to make yourself vulnerable in order to do those things. And then I'm like, no. Taking off armor isn't enough, because there's actually this internal state change that has to happen in your mind. So that's when I decided a caterpillar would make a better metaphor for this circumstance. So at the end, if any of you have an opinion on which metaphor I should pick for the next time I give this talk, feel free to come let me know. So when I look at the invisible curriculum, one of the things Melanie said is that taking feedback is probably the most important thing you can do, and demonstrate that you can do in any role. And I think that and demonstrate that you can do is really important, because sometimes you can be good at something and people don't notice. So you have to make sure that it's noticed, or you can be good at accepting feedback, but if you don't mention that to someone, they may not know that you incorporated their feedback. The other thing she talked about is how when people give you feedback, it's not about you. This isn't about you and what you did and your ego. All that we care about, the common thing, is we want to make Postgres better for our users. And so as long as you keep your eye on that ball, then it becomes much easier to take feedback. So this kind of feels like a no-brainer. How many of you know that taking feedback is really important in your jobs? Yeah, see? Half the hands in the room went up, and probably a bunch more were just too tired to raise their hands, but you felt like that anyway. And yet, it's a good reminder, because it is easy to become defensive. It is easy to, get your feelings hurt, or get annoyed, or feel like they're wrong, or dismiss certain feedback because, no, they just don't understand. But in the Postgres world, you've got to be able to take that feedback, or you're not going to be successful as a hacker. Tom also talked about feedback, and his point was that you have to adopt this mindset that embraces feedback. You have to welcome it. You have to invite it. And he also said that your ideas may be good or they may be bad. Or sometimes maybe they're going to be good after you've incorporated a lot of feedback, but it's going to take you a while to get there. And so he's just like, it's a mindset change, and you've got to welcome it. And if you are, I have this colleague I used to work with. He used to get really defensive and was very proprietary about his ideas and didn't like anybody to poke at them or make suggestions or whatever. And like that mindset just doesn't work in this kind of collaborative open source project environment. Heikki, when he told the story about his very first patches years ago that got committed, he said, when Tom Lane committed my first patches, the patch did not look much at all like what I first submitted. And he's like, but I'm okay. I'm still proud of those first patches. Yeah, they got changed and improved upon by Tom and by others, but he realized it wouldn't have happened without his participation, like him submitting it, him doing the initial amount of work involved in that. So I thought this was a good example of adopting that mindset where you welcome feedback. This is a photo that I took, and the piece of paper there is a recipe that has been passed around. You can see that it's stained, it's old, a lot of people have touched it, the recipe has evolved over time. And when Bruce talked to me about how he feels like every time you see a patch committed, that it's got the ideas of dozens of different people in it, right? There's been all that conversation on the mailing lists and feedback given, incorporated, different feedback given, incorporated. And so it just reminded me of this recipe and how those things evolve in the kitchen. So I think it goes back to having that mindset of adopting feedback and how it all gets incorporated together. Thomas Monroe had a completely different kind of lesson to share. I think he was reflecting on something that he worked on a couple of Postgres releases ago that made it in and then got reverted, got pulled out. And he said, like, there can be a huge amount of expectation and disappointment that happens. There's all these ups and downs. Sometimes the thing you're working on will make it. It'll get in. It'll benefit users. It'll benefit your not just users, but even your teammates, because maybe they're then able to solve other problems and build on top of it. But sometimes things don't make it in, and you feel frustrated, and it's hard. And so he talked about how important it is to be able to manage your emotions and manage your ego when that happens. All right. And then this might be, I don't know, is it the most interesting or the most important point in the talk? Tom Lane talked about how when you fail in an open source project, those failures are extremely public. Everybody can see them. And you can't look the other way or pretend it didn't happen or sweep it under the rug, because it's right there. It's in the code base. Everybody can see it. It's on the mailing list. And so I suppose that means you need to have a little bit of Kevlar, or maybe it just means that you have to own up to it and deal with it and move on and recognize that we're all human beings, and every single person, no matter how good you are, is going to make mistakes sometimes. And that's just the nature of working in public. And some people don't like that. I mean, have you ever met somebody who, when they do make a mistake, they try to like hide it? They don't mention it. They're kind of embarrassed by it. They might even lie about it or misrepresent or something. Not that anyone should ever lie about it, but it's just normal. Some human beings are raised to think that mistakes are bad, but in an open source project, they're going to happen. So I thought this was really, really important and interesting. So Andras Freund, he is a wonderful Postgres committer, works at Microsoft. He's actually the person that led the recent asynchronous I/O project that just merged into Postgres 18, although they've been working on it for several years now and putting in like precursor features into previous releases. But he's originally from Germany. So his native language is German. And he's very fluent in English. But in the very beginning, he would translate his technical emails directly in his head. I don't think he was using a translator like Google Translate or something, but in his head, he would write his mailing list mails in English in the same way that he would communicate in German. And he said it created lots of conflicts. And he eventually realized that he cannot translate literally from German to English. He had to like tailor his style a little bit to maybe be a little bit less, I don't know if harsh is the right word, but once he made that adjustment and started communicating differently in English, things went, a lot of those conflicts just fell away. 5 minutes? Okay, I'm going to keep going. David Rowley's advice was to make your work stand out. If you're a new contributor to Postgres and you're working on it, show that you've done your homework. Show that you've done your research. Remember how when we were all little kids and there'd be a math problem and it was so tempting to just shout out the answer? And the teachers would say, no, show your work. Well, it's kind of like that, right? Showing your work and showing that you've done your homework just makes it easier for the committers and the patch reviewers to give you feedback and to review what you've done. Bruce had some other advice about meeting people in person. And that's kind of why I'm here at PGConf India, right? He gets on a plane a lot. He does travel the world and gives conference talks at lots of Postgres events around the planet. But obviously everybody here made the effort to show up in person, whether you're local and had to come an hour and a half across town, or whether you flew in from another part of India or another country, like you've made the effort. And so definitely take advantage of that hallway track. Even if you're maybe a little shy or a little introverted, introduce yourself to people, go talk to the folks at the booths. Like those in-person interactions can lead to all sorts of interesting opportunities. And then Tom Lane also talked about embracing the edit cycle, which I love because I'm a big fan of like, sometimes I'll share an idea when it's still bad and half-baked and half-cooked. And I'll tell people, look, it's a bad idea, but let's talk about it because maybe it will lead us to something better. And he talked about how he will sometimes go on the mailing list and say, what do you guys think about doing something like this? And he finds that more valuable sometimes than trying to make it perfect before he shares it. Because sometimes then that's a waste of time. Like the thing you made perfect ends up being the wrong approach. So embracing the edit cycle was another one of these invisible learnings. And I think I just have a few more. When you said 5 more minutes, is that before Q&A or is that the total amount of my time? Total. Okay, I'm going to speed up. Being willing to explore dead ends, super important. Like some people don't want to go down a dead end. They feel like they've wasted their time. But to do something as bold and audacious as some of the new features in Postgres, you're going to have to go down some dead ends to find your way there. And that's okay. So I thought that was a really interesting insight. Alvaro Herrera talked about how important it was for him to be exposed, I think this was in his second quadrant days, to user feedback and how that made him a better hacker, that getting exposed to what the users were actually experiencing. And then Anders Freund had the same feedback. When he first became a Postgres hacker, he was still, I think he was still doing some consulting where he would get feedback from users, and he felt like that gave him an advantage over other hackers because he really felt like he was seeing things from that user perspective. Okay, this also might be super important. Recognizing other people's work. People don't say thank you enough, I think. There is no cost to recognizing your teammates' work, your colleagues' work, other people who are working on the open source project, and making people feel good about their contributions can have a huge impact on their motivation and what they do in the future. And so I thought that was an important takeaway. And then this is the last one. Anders Freund also said to remember to take care of yourself. It's so easy when you're working on something that's hard. Maybe you've been working on it for months, and to just keep working hard, keep working, like burn the midnight oil. And his point was, as he worked on asynchronous I/O, which was a many-year-long journey, that he found that exercising and sleep and taking care of your relationships had just as big an impact on his work as the work itself. So I thought that was a good reminder too. So this slide just gives a recap of everything we just covered, and you can see the invisible curriculum has the most items on the list. And these are all the episodes that we just covered. And these are the people I want to thank. And I'm not going to read off all their names, but there were a whole bunch of people who influenced me on the podcast and in reviewing the slides themselves. So I like to say thank you for that. And then I have 2 quick favors. One is just, how many of you have heard of Posette, an event for Postgres? That's so cool. It's a virtual event. It's happening in June 16 through 18. You can save the date and hopefully participate in the text chat on Discord. My team is organizing it. But we have speakers from all over the world, many different companies. It's not just a Microsoft thing. And this is a Microsoft thing. Stop by our booth if you haven't already to get your free socks. We're also doing a trivia game. There's 3 more left, 1 this afternoon and 2 tomorrow with some pretty cool prizes. So the 3 people who answer the most correct questions the fastest, I guess, will get some of these either Postgres necklaces or really cool hand-crocheted elephants. And then there's the survey. So there's a special kind of pair of socks at our booth for anybody who completes the survey that just has like 4 or 5 questions. It helps us in our work on Postgres. I also have a handful of last year's activity books up here if anybody has been looking for those. And I think that's all I've got. Thank you very much for coming.